Hey, Launch Family, have you checked out the Dare to Launch Bonus Vault yet? The Bonus Vault is where we put all the stuff that we can't fit into these episodes. There's extended conversations with our guests, Jeff's rules for copywriting, and we just added the 39-page transformational value manifesto. It's all free. Just go to daretolaunchshow.com/taco, enter your email, and you get access to the Bonus Vault. Now here's today's Dare to Launch.
People don't talk about this a lot because it's, we talk about a lot of super empowering things on this podcast and resilience and all this, but the motivation to prove someone wrong. So Chris, the stock market's open 252 days a year. And I know that because I've had 252 days a year I was publishing. There's one characteristic that I have that I'm a very loyal person. I'm like to a fault. I'm crazy loyal to people. To me, there's serious injustice here. And so that really pisses me off. This is what I know now. This is after years of reflection. What I know now is...
I heard that you had your business stolen from you at some point in your career and your life. Can you tell me what that story was?
Yeah, it was a crazy time. Absolutely crazy. I was about 8 years into my first online business, and I had a partner in that business, and that partner basically created a lot of the content, and then I did every other piece of the business. I did all the marketing, all the business operations stuff, all the customer service, every single thing except for creating like the raw content. And when I say raw, it was like about 300 or 400 words of, run-on sentences. And I would take that and I would rewrite it into something that was readable and publish it and do everything else. So the business was about the stock market. And this partner I had a lot of experience in the stock market. When we started out, a lot more experience than I did, far more than I did. And so we had sort of a 50-50 partnership where I did 95% of the work, but because he brought this knowledge and experience of the stock market, and it was extraordinary knowledge and experience and success. I did almost all the work. He sent me a couple, 200-300 words, maybe 400 words of, barely legible stuff each evening. And I would take that and I would shape it into something that we could sell.
How to be a great copywriter 101, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Just like...
Yeah. And I'll tell you, part of the reason that it was, just to go deep into the story, he was actually quadriplegic. He had to type those 300 or 400 words of, like I said, it wasn't beautiful. It was run-on sentences, no punctuation on it, but it was very difficult for him. It would take him a lot of time because he had to use this typing stick and peck out like one letter at a time. It was hard for him, and it took a lot of effort, and that's why I had to do a lot of work to clean it up. Anyways, we had this partnership, and we were about 8 years into it. And, for a number of reasons, and anyone who's been in a very long-term relationship knows that you can have things that are not, that gradually erode the relationship. And I think we had those things. And so I'm going to tell the story from my side of the story, but understand that this is like a divorce, really. And divorce is there's always two sides to it, to any divorce story. He wasn't a great communicator. And then instead of saying, I've got these problems, one day he called me up and said, hey, I'm starting my own website. I'm starting my own business, and I'm going to take all of our subscribers and move them over to my new business. So essentially, we'd spent 8 years building up, a group of subscribers who stayed with us for a very long time because we put out a really good product. And he said, I'm taking them all. And it's like, and literally, Chris, I told you this once before, I would sit at this desk in this spot, and there was a phone right here. And it was a Friday afternoon in March. And he's like, hey, I want to talk. And you talk. I'm like, okay. I pick up the phone, and he's like, yeah, I've started my own business. I've started a competing business, and I'm moving everyone over there on Monday. And this is Friday afternoon. Beautiful, beautiful Friday in March. And it's like, and I mean, this is taking my livelihood. That was the start of things.
How okay, I gotta ask, like, okay, there's was this, because the story that I've heard you tell so many times is you started an email list with like 13 people or 19 people, right? Like small amount, and 2 of them are you or 3 of them are you, right? Like was that the email list that he's talking about, like you kind of built up, or is that something completely?
So I started a list, and it was for it was sort of telling what I thought was going to happen in the stock market. And it was more written for longer term investors. At the same time, I had this interest in short-term trading, which people is something, day traders, people talk about that now. That's a big thing now. This was back in the 90s and no one talked about it. It was a very tiny little niche. But this person, my partner, his name was Mike. Mike was sort of my mentor. So I was studying everything about the stock market, and he was my mentor in trying to learn to become a trader. While at the same time, there was this, I was building this list of investors, and those are 2 different things. I know a lot of people might, unless you're really deep into the market, you might not know this, but trading and investing are 2 different things.
Right. Right.
Betting on GameStop versus buying shares in the Fortune 500, 2 very different things. And I hope everyone understands the difference, because people get into trouble when they don't understand those. So anyways, I started building up this email list. I had this newsletter I was sending out a couple times a month about investing. And at the same time, I had this relationship with Mike. And at one point, I can't remember if it was Mike's idea or my idea, I've now learned how to build an email list, and I've learned how to create the most basic website. I've learned the most basic stuff about marketing, and it seems like I'm good at it. Maybe we could do something together. We could partner together and publish something about trading based on his knowledge. So that's what we did. And that was in early 1997. That was actually the very first launch that I ever did. And so then we built that business from 1997 until 2005.
And then he calls you on a Friday and just says he's taking the business. What was the first reaction when you put the phone down?
Well, I mean, first of all, it was just like a gut punch. I mean, I just felt it like, and then, that was one reaction. And then the other reaction is I actually laughed. I laughed because for a couple reasons. One is he had no freaking clue about what it took to run a business. So the idea that he was going to magically create a business was just silly. And then the second one was like, I built this. Yes, we use his 200 or 300 words of that he sent to me each day, but that's not what built this business. What built this business is marketing. And I did this once, I can do it again.
Did you think that immediately?
Yeah, I did. I had both of those. So one was like a little bit of, oh my, I cannot believe it. I've got rent to pay, or not rent. I've got a mortgage to pay. I've got 2 young kids. I've got a family that's completely dependent on this business. And it's like, and on the other hand was like, yeah, bring it on. It was almost like all my success in the next year was just to prove him wrong. And, this is something people don't talk about this a lot, because it's, we talk about a lot of super empowering things on this podcast and resilience and all this, but the motivation to prove someone wrong, maybe even you call it revenge, that can be a very strong motivator. And I was like, yeah, we'll see. We'll see. A year from now, we're going to see who's who in this relationship and who brought his thought was, I'm bringing all the value. I'm sending these 200 or 300 words a night. That's what's built the business. And in my mind, it's like, yeah, right. We put out a good product, but you can put out a good product, and if no one's looking at it, if there's no marketing, you don't have a business. And, at the end of the day, we both have frustrations with each other, but I just think it was just not the way to handle it the way he handled it. And, the idea that he just walked away with, this user base that was generating hundreds of thousands of dollars a year was just, and thinking, so it was somehow my fault was just crazy.
So he kind of took the business from you, but he gave you something. He gave you purpose in some capacity, right? Like, I've heard this before in talking, I don't know where I got it from, but it's somewhere in my head from people I've talked to, but like to get off self and be on purpose is the way to kind of drive yourself forward or drive a business forward too, towards success. In that moment, it sounds like you had that gut punch, which was like, that's the self, right? Like focused on self. And then you got to on purpose really quite quickly because, whether it be out of spite or, revenge or whatever you want to call it, it was a purpose to drive yourself and to actually move in a direction and to not be, say, taken out by the gut punch, but to actually use it as fuel towards building something that is bigger and better and more magical and maybe even more in alignment with who you really need and want it to be. At least that's what I'm observing. Is that what it was? Or would you say that it felt like that at that time? Or was it different? Did it feel different?
So that business that we had was a nice business. And I was making more money than I could have ever dreamed of. By that time, we'd already moved the family out to the mountains. We'd bought a home in our dream hometown. My wife had retired from the corporate world, and she was helping me in the business. The kids were thriving. And so that business and that income afforded me a lot. And I was also getting sick of it. I was over it. And part of the reason for his frustration was I'm sure he felt that in me, that I just like wasn't excited about it anymore. I was getting more and more excited about marketing, about the possibility of teaching marketing. I had already actually started an email list teaching some of the stuff I'd learned about marketing. That was completely separate. It was completely different. I'd never talked about it to my stock market people. I just started building it off in its own little corner, which is a whole lesson there. I started building a list before I even thought I might have a business in that market. But I was over, publishing every single day. We were publishing multiple times a day. Every day the stock market's open. So Chris, the stock market's open 252 days a year. And I know that because I had 252 days a year I was publishing. And I was publishing usually, always at least twice and maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times. And so I was already starting to, this is a grind. And I used to be super passionate about the stock market, but I found I have more passion for entrepreneurship and marketing. So I was sort of ready to move on. One characteristic that I have that I'm a very loyal person. I'm like to a fault. I'm crazy loyal to people. And I never would have left him. I never would have abandoned him. And part of it was, he had helped me out as my mentor. Part of it was, I knew what we built for him was an amazing thing because, with his physical capabilities, this was an amazing way for him to participate in the world and to make money. I would have never walked away from him. Mm-hmm. And if he hadn't stolen, this is what I know now. This is after years of reflection. What I know now is I would still be publishing 252 times a year right now if he hadn't stolen the business. If he hadn't taken the business, then I wouldn't have been able to go on to Act 2. And, Act 2 has been pretty extraordinary.
Well, I can only imagine that at that moment in some capacity, did it feel like it was one of the worst things that's happened to you in your life? And then in reflection, it seems like it might be one of the best. Yeah,
absolutely. Certainly felt like one of the worst and one of the most unjust. It's just completely unjust. Like I said, there's two sides to every story, but in this story, there was a business asset and he ended up with the business asset, 100% of it, and I ended up with 0%. So to me, there was serious injustice here. And so that really pisses me off. And like I've got this weird love-hate relationship with the competitive aspects of my personality. But I'll tell you the one place where that will bring out like crazy, like Michael Jordan level of competitiveness with me is when I sense an injustice, and I'm like, yeah, okay, game on. And this got ugly. Lawyers were involved. Chris, at that point in my life, I had literally never spoke to a lawyer, ever. And now all of a sudden I'm on the phone. I've got 3 lawyers in 3 different states. We're going to federal court because, there was parts of the business he wasn't able to sell. He sued me for. I mean, the parts that he wasn't able to steal, he sued me for. So all of a sudden I'm talking to lawyers. I've got bills for lawyers. I'm like, I'm on a call. It's like, this is $1,000 an hour call for me because I got 3 lawyers I'm on. It got super ugly. And those times were challenging. I mean, anytime you're talking to lawyers, and they're in a professional capacity, and someone's suing you, those are horrible conversations. I remember one of the main lawyers saying, okay, put this in a box. We're going to have this conversation here for this next whatever few minutes, and this is a box, and put all those emotions in the box. And then once we're off the call, just set that box aside. And I'm like, yeah, I wish I could do that because it's churning away. Yeah, just anger. And this is, I'm going to figure a way out of this, but boy, this sucks. But literally the best thing ever.
How long did it really take for you to get to that recognition that this might have been a good thing? And was there a moment, or was there a time when you realized, like, thank goodness that happened, or I'm glad that happened?
Well, first of all, one thing I had to do is I had to go tell my wife.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Let's not skip that part.
Yeah, I had to go tell Mary. And hey, we just lost our income. It's going to be okay. It's going to be fine. But we just lost our income. She's got a couple little kids. And I think mom's role is usually to be the person who's more alert to threats. I think she had seen me achieve enough where she's like, I have faith in you. We'll figure this out. And I do remember, I'm going to skip forward towards the end of the story here, is that I remember talking to my lawyer, and this is like a year later when we finally come to a settlement. I said, what I really want to do is I really want to send him a copy of my tax return so he can see just how much money I've made in this year since he did this. And she's like, don't do that. That's just not a good idea. Don't do that. I'm like, I really want to.
Probably good moves not to. Don't put that in the advice column.
Right. Yeah. So don't do that. Don't provoke people. But yeah, it was interesting. So one of the things is, so this is March, probably mid-March when this happened. But just a few weeks later, I had already accepted an invitation to come and speak. It was Yannick Silver had this event called the Underground Seminar. It was like the biggest online internet marketing kind of event at those days. And this was his first one he'd ever did, but it was going to be huge. Yannick was this huge persona. He's a dear friend of mine, and he was going to have this event. I think it was just a few weeks later, and he had already asked me to speak like months beforehand and come and talk about launches and talk about how I did launches in this business. I pinged Yannick and I said, hey, Yannick, I know I told you I'm not in this business of teaching marketing. I've just come to speak because I think it's going to be fun and I like you and I want to help you out. But I call him up and I said, hey, this thing happened. I just lost that business. So I'm now interested in starting a business teaching marketing because it's what I'm proven good at. And do you mind if I make an offer at your event after I speak? I'll do the best job I can with the talk, and then I'll make an offer. And he said, sure, no problem. And so so I got up on stage. I taught my heart out for 75 minutes or something. So yeah, I went out and just gave my best stuff. Everything I knew about launches and launching, and in about an hour, 75 minutes, and then I made an offer for a product launch workshop that I would take people through and teach them more. I already had that door was already opening when this unfortunate situation all transpired. So I instantly went, okay.
So it went from being an idea and sort of like, oh, this fun thing you get to do, to now, this is my new highway. Like, this is the way in which I'm going to go. And so this was prior to PLF even really existing, right? So this was prior to you like having this is almost like a seed launch before a seed launch, right? For you, right?
It very much was for our product launch formula owners out there. This is the first seed launch. And yeah, that's what I did. Was I got on stage and I didn't have a ton of experience speaking, but I'd been on stage a few times at that point, probably about maybe 2 or 3 times before that. And it was something that I was pretty comfortable with right from the start.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's not a lot of times. That's very different selling from stage though, versus just speaking, isn't it?
It is. It is. And Chris, I was not a natural at sales. So I think there was probably 200 to 230 people in the audience or something like that. This is back in 2005. Our world was much smaller. So that was still a big event for the time. But I think I gave a great presentation, and then I made an offer, and the offer I think was for $3,000. And I also had I'll work with you one-on-one for $15,000. And so I sold six at the $3,000 level, which the normal rule of thumb is that you should be able to sell 10% of the audience. And so
23, right?
Yeah.
Would be, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I was about 1/3 so I probably did about 3%. So,
but how did you feel about it though? Like, did you feel like it was low, or were you like, oh, I got someone, thank goodness? Like...
No, that's how I was. I got someone. I'm stoked. I guess I didn't really know those metrics that well then. 6 months later, I came out with product launch formula. But this friend said, hey, you made that offer at that event and you only got 6 people to buy. It doesn't seem like this has any legs. Why are you creating this product for that? It just doesn't seem like there's a demand for this audience, for this product, for this topic. Why are you going through all this effort to create a course around it? And I'm like, to me, the answer was simple. It's like, I'm not good at selling from stage. I have no experience selling from stage. I don't, there's no reason for me to expect to do well selling from stage because it's not something I've ever done before. But I know how to do launches, and I'm going to launch this course. And that's an area that I'm an expert in. And, that launch, which was October of 2005. So this was 7 months after having the business stolen, did $600,000 in its first week.
It's funny that someone would say that there's no market for an online marketing program at that time. It makes me think of like the guy who said the global market for IBM computers is like, 1,000 computers or something like that. I can't remember the number. It was something ridiculously small.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I mean, I guess at that time this was sort of it was revolutionary the way you were doing things.
Yeah.
And nobody was getting the results like what you were doing. And then for you to come on the scene as the person who created PLF, product launch formula, and it to actually work, right, and actually get people results, that shaped an entire generation of marketing, right?
It has. Yeah. It has.
Wow.
Well, one interesting thing, when I made that offer, I said, it's $3,000 and we're going to do 5 or 6 calls and I'm going to walk you through how to do this. But then I also made that offer for that I work with you one-on-one. And that offer was $15,000 and plus 10% of the launch.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason I made the offer that way was to make the $3,000 look very inexpensive, because I'd say, $15,000 to work with me and plus 10%, or you could do this workshop for $3,000. So give them that big number, and that's just classic price anchoring.
Totally. Yeah.
And you know what happened, Chris, is everyone wanted the $15,000 deal.
And how many people can you work with one-on-one, right?
In my head, I said I'd take 2 people. I ended up taking 3. But there was like a couple others that I turned down just because it's a lot of work. And so that was really interesting to me. One of those people, and this is a name you probably are not going to know because it's a name from the past, but a few people listening will, is Corey Rudel. And so Corey Rudel actually is a Canadian, and he created something called the Internet Marketing Center. He was like the first guru. He was the first online internet marketing guru ever. He's the first person I ever saw speak on stage in early 2000. He was just he was wonderful. And he was one of the people that bought. And I was like, oh my, I cannot believe this. Corey Rudel bought from me. This is incredible. Then unfortunately, he was in a auto racing accident, and he was killed. And so I literally talked to him like the day before his accident, and we sort of figured out all the deal and what we were going to launch and yada. And then he passed away. Horrible tragedy. That's just a little bit of trivia for those folks out there, that the one person out there that knows who Corey was is like one of the absolute first people that ever hired me.
So looking back on that story, and how, I'm curious, like, how often do you think about that nowadays?
Very, very infrequently. I did it was a couple of years, because then, he was just doing all kinds of crazy stuff. He was stalking me, like online stalking, just weird stuff. He'd always show up anytime I did something live and, leaving nasty comments. It was just weird, just some weird energy. But then, I sort of worked through it. I actually, in my book Acknowledgements, I thanked all these people that have helped me throughout all the years, and I put him in the acknowledgments. I doubt that he ever saw that, but, it was important for me to, he gave me confidence to ask for money because he had this expertise in the stock market. So he gave me that initial confidence. That was fantastic. And that it was the greatest gift when he did that, when he took the business. And in the reality, he's like, I'm moving all the subscribers over to my new business. I could have said, no, I'm going to fight this out in public with our subscribers and say, no, don't go with him, go with me. But I also knew that I had bigger things ahead of me.
No.
And it was a painful process. It was hard to go through. And at one point I'm coming down into the product launch formula, and he's trying to, he's countersuing, and not countersuing, but adding additional lawsuits. And I'm like, I just don't have time for any of this. This is just bullshit. And I got bigger fish to fry. But yeah, it was definitely, it felt like a crucible moment. And when I look back, my business now it's probably about 50 times, like 50 times bigger than it was then. Mm-hmm. My impact is 1,000 times bigger. I love my business. I love my team. I love my clients. And none of that would have happened if he hadn't sort of, like I said, I'd still be publishing 252 times a year if it wasn't for him coming in and blowing things up.
That year must have been, well, maybe a couple of years, but that time in your life must have been very stressful. And like you mentioned, lots of things that were out of your control that were really affecting you. And, channeling into sort of maybe overcoming adversity or mental, resilience in that time period. What were the things that helped you during that time period get through that and stay focused on what was really, really important when you could easily have been drawn into all these negative and dark places dealing with lawyers and someone who's, got animosity towards you?
I think, first of all, my wife, Mary, has just been an amazing support for me all along, including then. Her belief in me has always been extraordinary. So that was part of it. Part of it was like, boy, times were a lot harder. When I started that first business, times were desperate. We had no resources. And so I've got a lot more resources now. We've always lived below our means, so we'd been saving money. And so I knew we were going to be okay in the short run. And then I think a big thing that really helped me out is just the amazing friends that I have in the industry. That there's just, this industry is filled with just so many incredible people. And like I mentioned, Yannick, he was like one of the leaders in this industry before he decided to step down. And he was there for me. And there were others, Frank Kern, John Reese, all these, Ryan Dice, these names that some of them aren't as present, but they're hugely influential at the time. And they were all happy to get on the phone and talk with me, talk through how to rebuild, what I should rebuild, the directions I should go in. And so, yeah, I think it was Mary. It was tapping into the success I'd already had, knowing that I had time because we do live below our means and we'd saved money. And then just these incredible relationships within the marketplace that I'd been building for years.
How does this time period in your life long-term affect your ability to manage stress?
I think it's sort of like going to the gym. This is like going to the gym and doing reps. There's so much in life that comes down to doing reps, get repetitions. And this was a big one. This was like, for 8 years, I figured something out and I was slowly building it and learning to overcome, learning to deal with adversity. And then all of a sudden, here's a really big one. So this was just like, okay, we've been through a lot to get here. And now it's just next level. We just leveled up in terms of problems. And so then, being able to overcome that and overcome it in a rather spectacular way, within less than a year, I had a business that was, over $1 million, and I had these raving clients and all kinds of success stories. I mean, it was just like this incredible rebirth. And so, huge confidence there that whatever comes up, I'm going to be able to handle it.
If someone who is listening to this conversation we're having right now is in that year that you're talking about, or they're going through it with, they're having that moment where something really terrible is happening or has happened in their business or life that's making it exceedingly challenging or stressful, what would you want to tell them?
So there are people going through hard stuff, and many of them 10x the hard stuff I went through. So I never want to minimize that. But I would just suggest that they think about, how or why or could this actually be a gift, in that you are going to come out the other side. And who you decide to become in this process could be something that creates resources and power for you beyond what you could ever imagine.
I think that's a really great lesson for people to take home with them. And as always, everybody, we appreciate you listening, and we thank you for subscribing and following. And we hope this conversation has inspired you to dare to launch.